15 anos após a criação das metas dos Objetivos do Milênio, está sendo elaborado um documento com novas metas de desenvolvimento humano, para que sejam perseguidas por todos os países da ONU nas próximas décadas. A promoção da paz mundial, com significativa redução da violência de todas as formas, deve ser uma das novas propostas do programa Objetivos do Desenvolvimento Sustentável. Em visita ao Brasil, John Sanders, diretor da Divisão sobre Drogas e Crimes da ONU, fala sobre o esforço coletivo atual para ampliar o número de metas no novo documento e conseguir o compromisso de todos os países integrantes da ONU.
The post-2015 extremely important because it will be all of the governments agreeing on their priorities for the next 15 years. And if you look back 15 years to the millennium, when the UN adopted the Millennium Development Goals, the goals that were identified 15 years ago, they haven't been solved, but they've made very significant progress. If you look at basic things like extreme poverty, infant mortality, violence against women, now they're taking stock about the last 15 years and thinking about where they want to go. And that process is very significant because it represents a decision by all 193 members of the UN. These are our priorities. Once you set for yourself an objective and you explain how you're going to accomplish that objective, and it's an objective that's measurable, that puts a responsibility on governments.
Uma das metas do novo documento é a redução da violência de forma global e a promoção da paz. A violência é vista como um dos inibidores do desenvolvimento socioeconômico. Mas existe realmente uma relação direta entre esses fatores?
You can't argue that you can't claim that there's always a direct correlation between violence and lack of development. Because you can look at examples, and I give the example of my own country, the United States, which is highly developed, but which has a significant problem of violence, especially the violence in the use of handguns. We see a tragedy where someone comes to a school with a gun, or they go to a business with a gun, and many people are killed. It's not just that if you want to have development, you need to address violence. It's more complicated than that. But we can say generally that it's difficult to make progress on social and economic development sustainably in the context of a highly violent society. If you're expecting the private sector to invest in a new department store or to build a factory that would create jobs, to provide economic opportunity, to lift up the population, those are very difficult things to do in the context of uncontrolled violence.
Na tentativa de entender melhor as razões da violência e criar políticas públicas mais estruturadas, governos e entidades buscam um consenso sobre a classificação e definição dos diferentes tipos de crimes no mundo.
When you talk about violence, for example, one indicator of violence is homicide. And we have a pretty good idea of why homicides happen. What are the cultural and sociological reasons why people commit violence against other people? Sometimes it's for economic reasons, sometimes it's for political reasons, sometimes it's for reasons of problems within the family. But each one of those manifestations of violence are problems that governments have good ideas about how to address. Although every government has a statute, a law, making murder a crime, every government has different gradations of murder. There's intentional murder, there's accidental murder, there's murder for political reasons, there's murder of a police officer. There's different ways in which the law addresses the same phenomenon. And that makes it complicated to try to compare the figures from one government to another because they have different legal codes. The other difficulty is that governments have sometimes been reluctant to share candidly that information because it could be embarrassing or because it might cause their own public to question whether they're doing a good job of addressing the problem. But over the last 7 to 10 years, in part because of the Millennium process and the milestones in the Millennium process, the UN has been working with governments and with academics to try to come up with some common definitions that would allow governments to report statistics about different types of crimes in ways that can be blended together to give a broader picture about directions that crime is moving across the world through different societies. We're seeing an emerging consensus in the international community about the ways in which crime can be defined and classified. And if governments begin to use those metrics, those categories, then that allows them to give institutions like the United Nations or other international institutions data that can be used in very useful ways. The best foundation on which to build public policy are facts.